Everyone, and welcome to this podcast. So I'm in my cabin gear. I've got my Minnesota Timberwolves hat on. I've got my flannel on. I'm at the cabin, and I've got ash on my forehead. Now, it is Ash Wednesday, but this actually comes from my wood-burning stove. But since it is Ash Wednesday, it's very appropriate. And I think it's also appropriate that we talk a little bit about Bonhoeffer and Sermon on the Mount, and especially today, the section that he's talking about is Blessed are the Merciful. Trying to figure out what it means to live as the Christian community in the world without falling into the ideological traps on either side. I mean, of course, there's the ideology on the left, but right now, the problem in my context is the ways in which the church seems to be trying to grab hold of power in different ways. I've been reading Jacques Ellul's The Subversion of Christianity, where he gives a critique of the church and the church's attempts throughout history to grab power and the negative things that come from that. And I think we're seeing it again today. The ways in which Christianity is being codified or used to justify certain ways of life, and then anyone who falls outside of those ways of life are in trouble or are excluded or find themselves increasingly pushed to the margins. And so what I'm trying to figure out personally is, what does it now mean to live as a Christian, a follower of Jesus, in response to all of these things, especially given the limits of power that I have. I have a sphere of influence, and how do I use that sphere of influence? But I certainly can't impact things on a large scale. And so what does it mean to live as the Christian community in this context? And this is where I think Bonhoeffer certainly helps provide some insight. Jacques Ellul, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's a French sociologist who, in many ways, embodies what Bonhoeffer's religionless Christianity might have looked like if Bonhoeffer had lived. The subversion of Christianity, he is certainly talking about the ways in which the church abdicates its responsibility by over-spiritualizing. He actually uses the word spiritual, I think, differently throughout the book, but kind of over-spiritualizing the gospel, but also then grabbing on, the church has always tried to grab onto these mechanisms of power and have sought security and things like that, which go against what Bonhoeffer has been talking about. And so I thought about actually doing an episode here about Jacques Ellul and the subversion of Christianity. But instead, we'll come back to Bonhoeffer. We may talk about Ellul down the road. I think there are some profound things that he has to say and contribute to the conversation that can be helpful for the church today. So here's where Bonhoeffer's at. He's going through the Sermon on the Mount. He sees the Sermon on the Mount as the heart of discipleship, and he is certainly not. He is not over spiritualizing this. He's not trying to say this is some kind of unrealistic ideal that we're being called to demonstrate our sin. He is suggesting that this is the heart of what it means to be the new humanity in Jesus, to be a disciple who follows Jesus along the way. And so he writes this about the merciful. Bonhoeffer writes, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. These people without possessions, these strangers, these powerless, these sinners, these followers of Jesus live with him now also in the renunciation of their own dignity, for they are merciful. As if their own need and lack were not enough, they share in other people's need, debasement, and guilt. They have an irresistible love for the lowly, the sick, for those who are in misery, for those who are demeaned and abused, for those who suffer injustice and are rejected, for everyone in pain and anxiety. They seek out all those who have fallen into sin and guilt. No need is too great, no sin too dreadful for mercy to reach. The merciful give their own honor to those who have fallen into shame and taken that shame unto themselves. They may be found in the company of tax collectors and sinners, and willingly bear the shame of their fellowship. So Bonhoeffer interprets this blessing as a call, again, out of security. This is the call of discipleship. And to go to those who are on the margins. And to be merciful, to become a people who let go of their own security, their own identity, their own honor, as we'll see here in a minute, and go out to those who are on the margins of society and who lack these things within the contemporary power structures. And so, again, for Bonhoeffer, this is what discipleship calls us to. It calls us to step outside of our own identity and to come alongside others, to come alongside the weak and the poor. And as we think about that today, Christianity is being used like a hammer to codify a certain way of life and say, this is what it means now to live as God's people. And then if you're outside of that, you're outside of the community. And the list that Bonhoeffer gives here, where he talks about sharing in people's needs, debasement and guilt, and going to the lowly and the sick and those who are in misery, those who are demeaned and abused, the current language and the current tenor of our culture is certainly about scapegoating. It is scapegoating immigrants. It is scapegoating others who don't fit into these neat categories. And again, these lines get drawn between in and out. And what Bonhoeffer is suggesting is that to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus or a disciple, is to step outside of those lines. He goes on to say, disciples give away anyone's greatest possession, their own dignity and honor, and they show mercy. They know only one dignity and honor, the mercy of their Lord, which is their only source of life. He was not ashamed of his disciples. He became a brother to the people. He bore their shame all the way to the death on a cross. This is the mercy of Jesus, from which those who follow him wish to live, the mercy of the crucified one. This mercy lets them all forget their own honor and dignity and seek only the company of sinners. If shame now falls on them, they still are blessed, for they receive mercy. It seems to me that Christians are falling into the trap politically on both sides of wanting to use political power as a mechanism to get the upper hand and to seek a justice that comes through the levers of political power. And it's almost as if we continue to fight for our own honor, that we want to make sure that our voices and our perspective gets honored more than, or at least the same as, this other perspective that we're speaking out against. And yet, I think what Bonhoeffer is suggesting here is that we need to find a way to step outside of this struggle over honor. In the ancient world, honor was seen as a commodity, and it was a rare commodity. So if one person is being honored, that means another person is being dishonored. And so you end up in this struggle over honor. Bonhoeffer is interpreting the Blessed are the Merciful part of the Sermon on the Mount as the call to step outside of that struggle. What does that look like for us to step outside of this strange and terrible battle that seems to be happening in our own country and come alongside the poor and the marginalized and to let go of our own security, our own desire to have our perspective to be recognized or honored, and to seek the well-being and the flourishing of our neighbor. Somehow we've got to get outside of this mess. It doesn't mean that we don't care for people. It doesn't mean that we don't care for their material needs. It doesn't mean that we don't try to find ways to help care for immigrants, to get them the legal help that they need, to help their communities and their families flourish in the midst of everything that's going on. But I think sometimes we lack the imagination to be able to step outside of the struggle as it exists. And could it be that what Bonhoeffer is suggesting here is that to call the merciful blessed is to step outside of this worry about whether or not we're being honored? to step outside of worrying about whether we're getting status, or our political party is getting status, or our view of the world is getting status, and to step back into the lives of real people and to take on their struggle, to be a part of their concern and their worry, and to take that upon ourselves. And it seems as though Bonhoeffer suggests that's the call of discipleship, to get into the mess, and not to get into the mess playing the game by the same old rules, but saying there's new rules, there's a new way of life, there's a new way of being, and that this is what Jesus is calling us to, that we would be merciful to one another, that we would enter the lives of others, that we would come alongside those who are different than us, and we would seek their well-being and flourishing. And that this is what it means now to live as the new humanity of Jesus Christ. And this is what it means to be a people of love, the law of love that is given to us in Jesus. And for Bonhoeffer, this is what Jesus does. This is what God does in Jesus. God steps down into our mess. God becomes a brother in Jesus Christ. And in coming alongside of us, bears our burdens and takes responsibility for our lives. And now this is what we're called to do. We're called to model that movement, and in the power of the resurrected Christ to come alongside those on the margins.